here's something that will completely shift how you see your life. Most of the problems you think are yours aren't actually yours at all. They're hand-me-downs, inherited anxiety, borrowed worries that you've been carrying around like they belong to you. Think about this for a moment. When did you first start worrying about money? Was it when you were 5 years old, playing with toys, completely content? Of course not. Someone taught you that money is scarce, that there's never enough, that you should be afraid of not having it. You absorbed that fear like a sponge and made it your own problem. Same thing with relationships. When did you decide you weren't lovable enough? When you were a baby, completely trusting that the universe would take care of you. Number: someone's disappointment, someone's rejection, someone's inability to love became your story about being unworthy. And you've been solving that problem ever since. Except it was never your problem to begin with. Most people are walking around carrying a backpack full of problems that don't belong to them. Your mother's fear of failure, your father's anger about not being successful enough, your grandmother's belief that the world is dangerous, your culture's obsession with productivity, your society's anxiety about not being enough. You think these are your problems because you experience them in your own mind, in your own body, but experiencing something doesn't make it yours. If you're staying in a hotel, you experience being in that room, but the room doesn't belong to you. Same thing with inherited fears and borrowed worries. Here's how this works. When you're young, your mind is completely open. You're like a radio that picks up every signal around you. Your parents are broadcasting their fears, their limitations, their unresolved traumas. You tune into those frequencies without even knowing it. And suddenly you think their problems are your problems. Your dad never felt good enough, so he works constantly trying to prove his worth. You watch this, absorb it, and now you have the same problem he had. Except it's not actually your problem. It's his problem living in your consciousness. But because you don't know the difference, you spend your whole life trying to solve something that isn't even real for you. The wild thing is, most of your problems disappear the moment you realise they're not yours. It's like carrying someone else's luggage through an airport for hours and suddenly realising you can just put it down. The weight was real, the exhaustion was real, but the luggage was never yours. Watch what happens when you ask yourself this question about any problem you're dealing with. Whose problem is this really? Not whose fault it is, but whose original problem it was. Whose fear am I carrying? Whose limitation did I inherit? Whose story about life did I make my own? Take anxiety about the future. Most people think this is just part of being human. But when you really look at it, where did that anxiety come from? Usually from someone who lived through difficult times and passed down the message that the future is dangerous, that you can't trust life to work out. You inherited their trauma response to circumstances that don't even exist in your life. Or take the problem of not being smart enough. When you were little, learning felt natural and fun. Then someone compared you to someone else, or made you feel stupid for not knowing something. That wasn't your problem originally. That was their problem with not knowing how to nurture intelligence. But you took it on as your identity problem. The strangest part is how fiercely we defend problems that aren't ours. Someone suggests that maybe you don't actually have a money problem. Maybe you just inherited your family's relationship with money, and you'll argue for your limitations. No, this is definitely my problem. I really am bad with money. But what if you're not? What if you just learned to be bad with money from people who were bad with money? Here's the thing about inherited problems. They come with inherited solutions that don't work. Your parents' generation tried to solve their problems in ways that made sense for their time, their circumstances. But you're trying to use their old solutions for problems that aren't even real in your life anymore. It's like using a map from 1950 to navigate a city in 2025. The roads have changed, new neighbourhoods exist, but you're still following directions to places that don't exist anymore. Except instead of getting lost geographically, you're getting lost in life. Most people spend their entire lives trying to solve their parents' problems, their culture's problems, their generation's problems. They exhaust themselves working on things that have nothing to do with who they actually are or what they actually need. But when you start to see which problems are truly yours and which ones you just picked up along the way, everything changes. The real problems, the ones that are actually yours to solve, become much clearer, and they're usually much simpler than you think. Your actual problems are usually about growth, about becoming more yourself, about expressing what wants to be expressed through you. They're creative problems, not survival problems. Expansion problems, not limitation problems. The inherited problems keep you small and afraid. The real problems help you become who you're meant to be. Now that you know most problems aren't actually yours, let's look at how the problem-making machine in your head actually works. Because once you see the mechanics, so you can't unsee them, your mind has this incredible ability to take any situation and turn it into a problem. It's like having a factory that takes perfectly neutral raw materials and processes them into worry, stress, and anxiety. The factory runs 24 hours a day, and most people don't even know they own it. Here's how it works. Something happens. Let's say you get an unexpected bill in the mail. That's just information, a piece of paper with numbers on it. But watch what your mind does with this neutral event. Within seconds, it's not just a bill anymore. It's a problem. The factory immediately starts production. How am I going to pay this? What if I can't afford it? What if more bills come? What if I lose my house? What if I end up homeless? In 30 seconds, you've gone from receiving a piece of paper to imagining yourself living under a bridge. That's the problem factory, working at full capacity. But here's what's fascinating. None of those thoughts are about what's actually happening right now. They're all about imaginary future scenarios that don't exist yet and probably never will. The problem factory specialises in manufacturing future disasters from present moment information. Most people think this is normal. They think this is what minds are supposed to do. Scan for problems, prepare for disasters, worry about things that might go wrong. But this isn't natural intelligence. This is anxiety masquerading as preparation. Watch a young child who hasn't been trained to think this way yet. They live completely in the present moment. If they're hungry, they ask for food. If they're tired, they sleep. If they want to play, they play. They don't have a problem factory running in the background, turning their needs into existential crises, but somewhere along the way, we learn to think that problems are more real than solutions. We learn to give more attention to what's wrong than what's working. We learn to scan constantly for threats, even in perfectly safe situations. The problem factory has several different production lines. There's the comparison line, which takes your life and compares it to everyone else's life, then produces feelings of inadequacy. There's the perfectionism line, which takes anything you do and finds everything wrong with it. There's the future disaster line, which takes current circumstances and projects them into catastrophic outcomes. Each production line has its own specialised equipment. The comparison line uses social media, other people's highlight reels, and cultural messages about success. The perfectionism line uses criticism, impossibly high standards, and the belief that anything less than perfect is failure. The future disaster line uses news, worst-case scenarios, and the assumption that bad things are more likely than good things. The strangest thing is how productive this factory thinks it is. It genuinely believes it's helping you by creating all these problems. It thinks that by worrying about the future, it's preventing bad things from happening. It thinks that by finding flaws in everything, it's making things better. It thinks that by comparing you to others, it's motivating you to improve. But none of that is actually true. The problem factory doesn't prevent disasters. It creates suffering in the present moment about things that aren't happening. It doesn't make things better. It makes you feel worse about things that are already fine. It doesn't motivate improvement. It creates paralysis through overwhelm. Here's the key insight. Problems are not discovered. They're manufactured. The same situation can be seen as a problem or as information, depending on which factory setting your mind is using. Take being single, for example. In one factory setting, this becomes a huge problem. What's wrong with me? Why can't I find someone? I'm going to be alone forever. Everyone else has found someone. Time is running out. The factory takes the neutral fact of being single and produces a complete identity crisis. But in a different setting, being single is just information. I'm not in a relationship right now. That means I have time to focus on other things. I can discover more about myself. I'm available for the right connection when it appears. Same situation, completely different experience. The problem factory runs on old programming. It's using outdated software to process current situations. Most of the threat detection equipment was installed when you were young, when you actually were vulnerable and dependent on others for survival. But now you're an adult with resources, skills and options, yet the factory is still running on child-level fear responses. Technical moment. If what you're hearing right now resonates with you, hit subscribe. This shows that the information is valuable. The factory also feeds on attention. The more you focus on the problems it produces, the more problems it makes. It's like a fire that grows stronger the more fuel you give it. If you spend all day thinking about your problems, analysing them, discussing them, researching them, the factory interprets this as demand and increases production. But here's what happens when you stop feeding the factory. When you stop giving constant attention to manufactured problems, the production starts to slow down. The machinery gets rusty from lack of use. The different production lines start shutting down. This doesn't mean you become irresponsible or ignore real issues that need attention. It means you learn the difference between actual situations that require action and manufactured problems that only require worry. Real issues have real solutions. Manufactured problems have no solutions because they're not actually problems. They're just thoughts about problems. You can think about being lonely for hours, but that won't bring you connection. You can worry about money all day, but that won't increase your income. You can stress about the future constantly, but that won't make it more predictable. The problem factory convinces you that thinking about problems is the same as solving them. But thinking about problems is just manufacturing more problems. Solving problems requires action in a present moment, based on actual circumstances, not endless mental production of worry and stress. When you understand this, you can finally turn off the factory when you choose to. And what you discover in the silence is remarkable. Most situations aren't actually problems at all. So now you know your problems aren't yours, and you understand how the problem factory works. But here's the really wild part. What you call problems are actually something completely different in disguise. They're growth trying to happen. Let me explain what I mean. Every single thing you label as a problem is actually life trying to move you toward who you're meant to become. But because we've been trained to see challenges as threats instead of invitations, we resist the very things that would liberate us. Think about it this way. A seed buried in soil could see the pressure around it as a problem. I'm trapped. I can't breathe. Everything is dark and scary, but that pressure is exactly what the seed needs to crack open and grow. Without the resistance, there would be no reason to develop roots, no reason to push toward the light. Your so-called problems are the soil conditions necessary for your growth. But instead of using them as fuel for transformation, you're trying to get rid of them, avoid them, solve them away. It's like a butterfly trying to strengthen the cocoon instead of breaking through it. Take one of the most common problems people think they have, not having enough money. On the surface, this looks like a practical issue that needs a practical solution. Get a better job, work more hours, spend less money. But when you really look underneath, what's this problem actually pointing toward? Usually, it's pointing toward a relationship with abundance, with self-worth, with trust in life's ability to provide. The money problem is just the surface symptom. Underneath, life is trying to teach you something about receiving, about recognizing your own value, about releasing the fear that there's not enough to go around. But instead of learning those lessons, most people just try to get more money. They solve the surface problem without addressing what it's really about. So the problem keeps coming back in different forms because the real growth hasn't happened yet. Same thing with relationship problems. You think the problem is finding the right person or fixing the person you're with. But underneath, relationship challenges are usually life trying to teach you about loving yourself, setting boundaries, communicating authentically, or releasing the need to control others. The relationship problem is just a classroom. The real curriculum is about becoming someone who can love and be loved without losing themselves. But most people keep trying to change the classroom instead of learning the lessons. Here's something that will blow your mind. The things you resist most strongly are usually pointing toward your greatest potential. The qualities you judge in others are often the qualities you need to develop in yourself. The situations you try hardest to avoid are frequently the exact experiences that would set you free. You hate people who are too confident because deep down you're afraid of your own power. You judge people who take up space because you've been trained to make yourself small. You resist people who speak their truth because you're terrified of speaking yours. The problem isn't them. The problem is that they're reflecting back your own unlived potential. Most problems are actually invitations disguised as obstacles. Life is constantly offering you opportunities to grow, to heal, to become more yourself. But because these invitations often come wrapped in discomfort or challenge, you interpret them as problems that need to be fixed rather than gifts that need to be opened. Think about the biggest challenge you've ever faced. At the time, it probably felt like pure suffering, like something you just needed to get through. But looking back now, can you see how it changed you? How it forced you to develop strengths you didn't know you had, how it opened doors that wouldn't have opened any other way. That wasn't a problem that got solved. That was growth that got disguised as difficulty. And the same thing is true for whatever you're dealing with right now. Your problems are actually your curriculum. They are the specific lessons your soul needs to learn in this lifetime. But instead of enrolling in the class, you're standing outside, complaining about the course requirements. Here's how you can tell the difference between a real problem and growth in disguise. Real problems have practical solutions. If your car breaks down, you fix it or replace it. If you're hungry, you eat. If you're cold, you find warmth. These are straightforward cause and effect situations. But manufactured problems, the ones that keep coming back no matter how much you try to solve them, these are always pointing toward internal growth. The external circumstances are just a delivery method for the internal invitation. You keep attracting relationships with people who don't appreciate you because life is trying to teach you to appreciate yourself. You keep having money problems because life is trying to teach you about abundance consciousness. You keep feeling stuck because life is trying to teach you about your own creative power. The problems aren't the point. The growth is the point. But you can't receive the growth while you're fighting the delivery method. This is why so many people feel stuck in the same patterns year after year. They're trying to solve problems instead of receiving invitations. They're trying to change external circumstances instead of allowing internal transformation. But when you start to see problems as growth opportunities, everything shifts. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of this? You start asking, what is this trying to teach me? Instead of resisting what's happening, you start working with it. The moment you stop fighting your problems and start partnering with them, they transform from obstacles into allies. The energy you were using to resist becomes available for growth. The situations that were draining you become empowering. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop taking action. It means you take inspired action based on understanding what's really happening, rather than reactive action based on trying to make problems go away. When you align with what life is trying to teach you, through your challenges, solutions appear that you never could have thought of while you were in resistance mode. Opportunities open up that were invisible while you were focused on what was wrong. Your problems aren't punishments or mistakes or signs that something is wrong with your life. They are precisely calibrated invitations to become who you came here to be, when you finally understand that problems aren't what you thought they were. Something remarkable happens. You start living from solution consciousness instead of problem consciousness. And this isn't just a nice idea. It's a completely different way of being in the world. Most people wake up every morning and immediately tune in to the problem channel. What's wrong today? What needs to be fixed? What am I worried about? They spend their mental energy scanning for threats, analysing difficulties and preparing for things to go wrong. Their entire day is organised around managing problems. But there's another channel available, the solution channel. People who live from this frequency wake up asking different questions. What wants to emerge today? What's possible? How can I contribute? They're not ignoring reality. They're seeing a deeper layer of reality, where solutions exist before problems even appear. Here's what this looks like practically. Someone living in problem consciousness sees a bill and immediately goes into stress mode. I don't have enough money. This is terrible. How am I going to handle this? All their mental energy goes toward the problem. Someone in solution consciousness sees the same bill and asks, what's the best way to handle this? Their energy goes toward finding solutions, creating more income, or organising their finances better. Same situation, completely different experience. The difference isn't optimism versus pessimism. It's not about pretending problems don't exist or thinking positive thoughts. It's about where you place your attention and what you feed with your mental energy. Problem consciousness feeds problems with attention, making them bigger and more complex. Solution consciousness feeds solutions with attention, making them clearer and more accessible. It's like watering different gardens in your mind. When you live from solution consciousness, you start to notice that life is constantly offering answers. Conversations happen that give you exactly the information you need. Opportunities appear that you never could have planned. Resources show up in unexpected ways. It's not magic. It's what becomes visible when you're looking for solutions instead of focusing on problems. Most people miss these signals because they're too busy analysing what's wrong. They're so focused on the problem that they can't see the solution standing right next to it. Living without problem thinking doesn't mean you don't deal with challenges. It means you relate to challenges differently. Instead of seeing them as enemies to defeat, you see them as information to work with. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by what's wrong, you feel energized by what's possible. This shift happens naturally when you realize that problems are just solutions that haven't been implemented yet. Every problem contains its own answer. The difficulty is just the gap between current reality and the solution that wants to emerge. Think about any problem you've ever solved. The solution was always there. You just couldn't see it at first. The problem wasn't actually the issue. The issue was not being able to access a solution that already existed. When you stop making problems more real than solutions, you start living in a different universe. Not because external circumstances change dramatically, but because your relationship to circumstances changes completely. People in problem consciousness ask, why is this happening to me? People in solution consciousness ask, how can I use this? Same situation, but one question leads to victimhood and the other leads to empowerment. This isn't about being positive or having a good attitude. This is about recognizing that solution energy and problem energy are two completely different frequencies, and you get to choose which one you tune into. Problem energy feels heavy, contracted, overwhelming. It creates stress, anxiety, and the feeling that life is happening to you. Solution energy feels light, expansive, creative. It generates excitement, curiosity, and the feeling that you're partnering with life. Most people think they need to solve their problems to feel better, but it's the opposite. When you feel better, when you shift into solution consciousness, problems either resolve themselves or reveal that they weren't actually problems in the first place. This is why trying to think your way out of problems rarely works. Thinking is usually just more problem consciousness. Real solutions come from a different place entirely, from creative intelligence, from intuitive knowing, from partnership with the intelligence that's always trying to help you grow. Living this way requires trust. Trust that solutions exist, even when you can't see them yet. Trust that life is working with you, not against you. Trust that what looks like a problem is actually an invitation to discover new possibilities. The people who live most successfully aren't the ones who have fewer challenges. They're the ones who have learned to see challenges as creative opportunities rather than threatening problems. When you make this shift, everything becomes easier. Not because life becomes problem-free, but because you stop creating suffering around the challenges that naturally arise. You start dancing with life instead of fighting it. This is what it means to live without problem thinking. You don't ignore difficulties. You engage with them from creative consciousness instead of victim consciousness. You don't pretend everything is perfect. You recognize that everything is workable. And the beautiful thing is, when you stop seeing problems everywhere, you start seeing possibilities everywhere instead. The same world becomes a completely different experience. If this video has changed something in you, write in the comments, "I choose solutions." Write it as your promise to yourself. Living from solution consciousness isn't just a better way to handle problems. It's a better way to live. Because when you're not spending all your energy maintaining problems, that energy becomes available for creating the life you actually want. And that's when you discover that most of what you thought were problems were actually just distractions from the incredible potential that was waiting to emerge through you all along. Nobody